There are losses that end when the final out is recorded. The players shake hands, the crowd filters out, the lights dim slowly over an empty field, and by morning it feels like just another entry in a long season. And then there are losses that don't end at all. They follow you into the tunnel. They follow you into the clubhouse. They sit in the silence between players who can't look at each other. They grow louder the longer nobody talks about them. What happened in the Dodgers clubhouse on this night was the second kind. 20 minutes. That was all it took. 20 minutes after the final out, before the media had fully settled, before the visiting team had finished celebrating, before most of the crowd had even reached the parking lot, Dave Roberts made an announcement. And nothing in that clubhouse would be the same after it. The walk from the dugout to the clubhouse after a loss has a particular feeling. Every player knows it. It's not dramatic. It's not loud. It's just heavy. The weight of what happened still clinging to the uniform, still living in the legs, still sitting in the chest. On this night, that walk was heavier than usual. The Dodgers had lost. Not in a close, hard-fought, left everything on the field kind of way. They had lost in the kind of way that leaves questions. The kind of way that demands answers. 4 runs allowed. A bullpen that came apart at the seams. Decisions made on the field that couldn't be explained away with statistics or careful language at a press conference. Players moved through the tunnel without making eye contact. Gear was dropped. Cleats hit the floor. Helmets were placed down with slightly more force than necessary. And then Roberts walked in. He didn't sit. He didn't take his usual spot near the manager's office and wait for everyone to settle. He stood in the middle of the room. Both hands at his sides. His jaw set. His eyes moving slowly across the faces in front of him. The room went completely still. Whatever they were expecting him to say, a brief acknowledgement, a reassurance, "we'll get them tomorrow," that every team uses to survive a bad night, that was not what came. Robert spoke for less than 3 minutes. But in those 3 minutes, he said everything. 2 players. He named them directly. No softening of language. No careful framing about organizational decisions and future directions and what was best for everyone involved. He said their names, and he said what was happening. They were being designated for assignment. Immediately. Tonight. The room absorbed it. Some players looked at the floor. Some looked at the 2 players being named. Some looked straight ahead at nothing, the way people do when they're trying to process something that doesn't feel entirely real yet. The 2 players said nothing at first. One of them nodded slowly, the kind of nod that doesn't mean agreement, it just means the words landed. The other stared at a fixed point somewhere across the room. Their lockers would be cleared. That night. Not in the morning. Not gradually over the next few days while the organization handled the paperwork quietly in the background. That night. 20 minutes after the loss. That timeline was not an accident. Roberts had made that choice deliberately. Because in the Dodgers clubhouse, on a team with championship expectations and a roster that had been built to deliver them, some things could not wait until morning. To understand why Roberts moved this fast, you have to understand what those 4 runs meant. This wasn't a game where the Dodgers offense went quiet and the pitching did everything it could. This wasn't a loss where the other team simply played better baseball from the first inning to the last. This was a game the Dodgers were supposed to win. A game where the margin existed. Where the talent on the roster was more than enough. Where the only thing standing between a Dodgers win and a Dodgers loss was execution. And execution failed. Specifically, it failed in the hands of 2 players who had been given the moment and couldn't hold it. The 4 runs allowed were not distributed evenly across 9 innings of hard-fought competition. They were concentrated. They came in bursts that had specific, identifiable causes. Bad decisions on the mound. A failure to adjust. Pitches thrown into locations that the scouting report had flagged, that the coaching staff had flagged, that the preparation had specifically addressed, and thrown there anyway. That's not bad luck. That's not a pitcher having an off night in the random, unpredictable way that sometimes happens in baseball. That's something else. And Roberts had seen enough of it to know the difference. Not everyone accepted the announcement without a response. Kyle Hart was one of the players named. And Kyle Hart, unlike the other, did not nod slowly and absorb it in silence. In the hours that followed, through channels that these things always find in professional sports, through voices that find their way to reporters even when the locker room door is closed, Hart's response began to take shape. He shifted the blame. Not to Roberts. Not to the organization. Not to himself, where the box score and the pitch-by-pitch data would clearly direct any honest examination. To Shohei Ohtani. The argument, as it was relayed and reported and eventually confirmed, went something like this: that the pressure created by Ohtani's presence in the lineup, in the dugout, in the overall culture of expectation surrounding the Dodgers, had contributed to an environment where certain players couldn't perform at their natural level. That the weight of being on the same team as the most watched player in baseball had become its own kind of burden. That Ohtani, somehow, was part of the reason the 4 runs were allowed. In the innings where Hart was responsible for the 4 runs allowed, Ohtani was not on the mound. Ohtani was not in the field behind Hart making errors. Ohtani was not calling pitches from the dugout or overruling the catcher's signs. Ohtani was doing exactly what the Dodgers needed him to do. He was producing. He was executing. He was, by every measurable standard available to the game of baseball, not the reason the Dodgers lost. The reason the Dodgers lost was on the mound. The reason was in the pitch selection that ignored preparation. The reason was in a failure of execution that couldn't be dressed up in complicated language and made to look like something it wasn't. Blaming Ohtani for a loss he didn't cause wasn't just incorrect. It was the kind of deflection that reveals more about the person doing it than about the person being blamed. And in a clubhouse that had just watched their manager name names and clear lockers 20 minutes after a loss, deflection was the last thing anyone wanted to see. What hadn't been fully discussed publicly, until now, was the specific sequence of decisions that led to each of those 4 runs. Because it wasn't one bad pitch. It wasn't one moment of bad luck that cascaded. It was a pattern. The coaching staff had identified, in preparation for this game, a specific tendency in the opposing lineup. A tendency toward a particular pitch in a particular zone at a particular point in counts. The information had been delivered. It had been reviewed. It had been discussed in the kind of detail that modern baseball preparation demands. And then, when the moment arrived, that information was set aside. The pitches were thrown. Not once. Not as a one-time deviation from the plan. But repeatedly. In the same zone. Against the same hitters. As if the preparation had never happened. The first run scored. Then the second. An adjustment should have come. The catcher moved his target. A signal was given. The adjustment didn't come. Third run. Fourth run. By the time Roberts made the call to the bullpen, the damage was done. Not because the pitcher had run out of ability. But because the pitcher had run out of accountability. The preparation was there. The information was there. The plan was there. The execution wasn't. And Roberts had watched all of it from the dugout with the particular expression of a manager who isn't surprised but is deeply, seriously done. Underneath all of it, under the announcement, under Hart's deflection, under the 4 runs and the cleared lockers, something else was happening that the Dodgers couldn't fully address in a press conference. Will Smith's injury was getting worse. The details were being kept close. The organization had not made a formal statement beyond the standard language about day-to-day evaluation. But inside the clubhouse, the people who knew what day-to-day actually looked like when applied to Smith's specific situation understood that those words were carrying more weight than they appeared to. Smith is not a complementary piece on this roster. He is not a player whose absence creates a minor inconvenience that a backup can absorb without much disruption to the team's overall structure. Smith is the Dodgers' catcher. The anchor of a pitching staff that depends on him the way a building depends on its foundation. The communication between pitcher and catcher in professional baseball is not a simple relay of signs. It's a relationship built over innings and months and years of shared experience, shared failure, shared adjustment. When Smith is behind the plate, the Dodgers' pitching staff operates in a specific way. When he isn't, everything shifts. Not dramatically. Not visibly from the outside. But measurably. In the choices made on the mound. In the comfort level of pitchers working through difficult counts. In the subtle calibration that happens between battery mates who trust each other completely. The possibility that Smith's injury could cost him more time than the organization was publicly acknowledging, that possibility was sitting in the background of everything happening in the Dodgers clubhouse on this night. And it made everything else heavier. When Roberts finally stood in front of the media, he had already done the hardest part. The announcement had been made. The lockers were being cleared. Whatever conversations needed to happen privately had happened. What remained was the public version of a night that had already been defined behind closed doors. A reporter asked about the designations. Roberts answered without hesitation. We needed to make a move. We made it. No elaboration. No long explanation of the organizational process. Just the facts, delivered in the voice of a man who was entirely comfortable with the decision he had made. Another reporter asked about the 4 runs. About what happened on the mound. Roberts paused slightly. His eyes didn't move. The preparation was there. The execution wasn't. That's what it comes down to. The room waited. Someone asked a follow-up about Hart's comments. About the blame being directed toward Ohtani. Roberts' expression didn't change. But something behind his eyes became very still. He let the silence hold for just a moment longer than comfortable. Shohei didn't allow those runs. He said. The scoreboard is pretty clear about that. And then he gathered his notes and stood up. The press conference was over. There will be people who say Roberts moved too fast. That designating players 20 minutes after a loss is reactive. That it doesn't allow for the kind of calm, measured decision-making that good organizations are supposed to practice. Those people have never stood in a clubhouse watching a team lose its grip on its own standard. 20 minutes wasn't impulsive. It was the result of everything Roberts had watched building over days and weeks and a stretch of games that told a story the statistics alone couldn't fully capture. The announcement wasn't made in anger. It was made with the cold clarity of a manager who had seen enough and knew exactly what the team needed to see from him in response. The Dodgers didn't lose a game tonight. That's recoverable. That's baseball. What Roberts refused to let them lose was the standard. The expectation. The understanding of what it means to wear that uniform in a season where anything short of a championship is failure. Lockers can be cleared. Rosters can be adjusted. The standings will shift and move and settle across a long season. But the standard Roberts said in that room, in 20 minutes, on the worst kind of night, that stays. That's the announcement that mattered.